Well, a commission of inquiry into political killings in KwaZulu-Natal's Glebelands hostel resumed today after a month-long break. It's investigating politically motivated murders dating back to 2011. The provincial government established the commission following a recommendation by the former public protector Thuli Madonsela. Well, my colleague Dasan Thathia joins us on the live now. He's actually down on the ground in KZN. Dasan, thank you very much for making the time this morning. Remind us where this issue comes from, what this is all about.
Well, that's right. As you mentioned, the commission was formed by the Premier last year, but the commission actually began its work in around January this year, and the public hearings, one of which we are going to attend today, began around March or so. And during that time, the commission has looked at issues around Inchanga and other areas around KZN, which has been plagued by political killings. Since January last year, we know that the police minister mentioned that there'd been at least 33 political killings in KZN alone. But talking specifically about Glebelands, which is what's going to be the topic of today's hearing, in fact, we know that the Public Protector's report mentioned that there were at least 44 killings there alone. Now, there's no confirmation whether all of those are political or not, but we know that these killings occurred between 2014 and 2016 or so. Now, although that is mentioned in the Public Protector's report that you released recently, independent researchers are saying otherwise, and they claim that that figure is closer to around 90 murders that have taken place during that time. And you know that one of the sticky points over those murders and those cases that are being investigated is that there hasn't been any convictions. So today will be definitely one to watch, because for the first time we'll be getting some kind of insight from those that have been close to the violence, whether it's victims of, family members of the victims, or those that have some kind of knowledge of what's been going on, and they will be testifying before the commission today.
Well, Dasan, you mentioned that there's been no convictions. In fact, the Public Protector's report was very scathing about law enforcement, saying that the police actually had made no arrests. How much truth is in there, Dasan, that there had been no arrest? And what impression does this live in the minds of the public, given that these are political killings? Does this leave the impression, Dasan, that senior political figures may be behind this, and perhaps this is the reluctance by law enforcement to actually crack open what is going on here?
In fact, those are only some of the allegations. In fact, if you speak to residents of the Glebelands hostel, and we've visited the hostel many times over the past few years, and even recently after the release of the Public Protector's report, and that is precisely the impression that's created in the minds of residents. So they claim that the police are implicated, or at least are connected to some of the criminals that are carrying out these crimes, although the SAPS was very quick to say that that's definitely not the case, and if there is anything to that end, that it should be brought to their attention and it would be investigated thoroughly. In fact, just last week, the Community Safety MEC visited Glebelands hostel almost to reassure the community, and he listened to some of the concerns that were raised. But interestingly, none of the concerns over security and safety were raised, but rather concerns over health and the general condition of the environment at Glebelands. And this also points to the fact that residents don't trust the police. So when we spoke to a group of residents last week already, before the meeting, who had been instrumental in providing information to researchers and to other parties talking about the violence there, they said that they were sitting with what they call solid proof, and they had tried to pass this on to police privately, but they claimed that there was no interest to that end. So it'll also be interesting to see what this commission uncovers on that front, to see if there's any truth to those allegations that are being put forward.
Well, Dasen, just lastly, therefore, we know that there are regional conferences of the governing party on the go ahead, of course, of the all-important national conference, elective conference of the ANC in December. We saw last week in Umzimkhulu 3 ANC figures being shot, and luckily none of them died. We understand they are in hospital. What is the governing party in KwaZulu-Natal saying about these political killings?
You know, we've seen many statements and many expressions of condemnation of what's going on, and certainly talking about the fact that this is not acceptable. Even last week we had provincial ANC leaders go out to the Umzimkhulu area as well, following those shootings. But there's certainly concern, and there's certainly fear, if I could call it that, over what's happening. And I think you touched on an important point, because in many of these incidents of political violence, we noticed that it is ANC councillors that are coming under fire and that are falling victim to what's going on. I mean, if you just look at Richmond, where there were 3 municipal officials, 3 senior municipal officials that were killed over the space of about 4 months or so. And that alone, that again highlights how dangerous and how serious the situation is. And we know that the Commission was quite interested in getting ANC leaders here before the Commission to get their perspective and to find out exactly what the party is doing and how they intend to handle what's going on across the province at the moment.
All right, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there for the moment. My colleague Dasen Tathia coming to us live from KZN, ahead, of course, of the resumption of the Muarane Commission of Inquiry into political killings in that province.